is setting some things up in the Archdale conference room and moving some people who logged on as attendees into panelists. Good morning, Betsy.
Good morning.
Morning, everyone.
Wait just a couple more minutes in case there's anyone still trying to get on or being moved from participant to panelist.
Tom, I had received an email about 20 minutes ago, and I thought that was the password I should be using, not the one from a few days ago. So that could be where people are having trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was using the one from a couple of days ago, and that call ended about 5 minutes ago. May have been the same one, but
yeah. Okay.
You are a panelist, the microphone
Okay.
just the part of yeah, the video, you do know the video's out on TV. The video is part of the
okay. So you can see it.
yes, yeah, this is us right here. And Tom, can you hear us?
I can hear you just barely.
Okay. Yeah. That's one. We were testing the microphones yesterday, and there's like hot spots. But I think if anyone that is talking can project, we should be able to.
Yeah, if I'm super attentive to what you're saying, I could hear it.
Can you hear us better if I stand right here?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is where the microphone is in the room.
Yeah, we can see the
Well, we
whole
should change the view to the U table then if we're going to do that.
Yeah.
the place that you're talking from now. We can hear.
Okay. And as we're closer,
Are you all ready for us to get started in that room, or do you need a few more minutes?
I think everything is good on our end. I would just ask if there is anyone that we know right now that has joined as an attendee that should be a panelist. Did I miss adding anybody?
If I can see the list of total people, let me see. David Howard should be moved to panelist, please.
Panelists. Okay, Virginia.
Chair, I think Virginia Goodry needs to be added to the panelist.
Great.
She has been added.
And Director Scott. Thank you.
Well, our meetings typically start with some compulsory circles, so I'll suggest that we get started and call the meeting to order. Thanks for being here, and thanks to Stephen Rice for setting up the remote access, and to Franny Nilsson for working with the department heads to craft the agenda for today. I have received regrets from Tom Starr, Elena Kenyon, and David Dorman, who's out of the country on travel. And Gina will be joining us, but maybe a tad late, Gina Kimball. So I appreciate everybody's flexibility, SAB members as well as staff, to pivot to a virtual format for what is an abbreviated docket that we have today. We have members that would have been traveling from Mecklenburg County, Brunswick County, and other parts of the coast. So this is a more efficient way for a short agenda than asking people to spend so much time in travel status. The agenda is brief, and I anticipate that we'll be done by noon with active participation. So with that, I think we can move to review and approve the agenda. It has only one change from the one that was sent last week, and that change is in the name of the final presentation. It's just changing the title to more accurately reflect what will be presented. Morning, Rich.
Hey, morning.
So let me get that change in title for you. The title of the final presentation was, from the draft version to the proposed final version, is DEQ staff will describe the intended use of EPA's bioaccumulation factors as part of the information needed for PFAS regulatory efforts and other DEQ activities. It's an informational item instead of an action item. And with that, there are no other changes that I have heard of. Is there any questions or comments on the agenda as drafted? Then hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as modified with the modified title of the talk as provided by DEQ.
This is Jamie, so moved.
Thank you, Jamie. Do we have a second?
This is Betsy, second.
Thank you, Betsy. Well, I guess as is our practice in a virtual setting, at least this is how we did it in the past. We just kind of had a roll call vote on that. And so all in favor of approving the agenda as modified, Rich?
Approve.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yes.
Thank you, Detlef.
Yes.
Thank you. Have you been joined by Gina yet? John?
Yes.
Betsy?
Yes,
Thank you. Viney? Not yet. And how about David Howard? Are you able to hear us, David? I know that you were on earlier.
I heard approve from him.
Gotcha. Thank you. I just missed it. I did mention that we have an abbreviated agenda. One other change that I'll mention here at the outset is that I'll be stepping away at noon. We may in fact be done by then, but if we're not, Dr. Vandenberg has kindly agreed to lead the final sessions of the meeting. To help craft that final session, I'm going to ask whether or not anybody has signed up for the public forum at this point. Do we know if there's anybody who has asked to speak so that we can factor that into the agenda? I guess I'd be asking that of whoever monitored the system where people would have had to raise their hands. Good morning, Viney.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you very much. It took me that long to get connected, so I don't know.
We're glad you're here. We're still doing the compulsory circles. We haven't jumped into any action items yet. Any big ones anyway.
But thanks a lot, and good morning to everybody.
So I'll pause just one more second and ask. I think I typically would have looked over at this point to Louise or somebody else who's managing IT to see if we've had anybody sign up, because I think the practice is that people would have had to sign up in advance so that they could have been made a panelist and we could have been made aware. But I don't know in the new format here how that would have worked.
Franny, are you able to let us know if we need more time? We could circle back to the chair.
Yeah, I don't mind circling back. But if we have somebody who's wanting to speak, who's already requested to speak, that'd be good to know.
No one has signed up so far.
All right. Well, thanks. That'll help us manage the transition from my time to John's time if we're not done, to know when a break might be. And if we're not waiting for a bunch of people to speak, perhaps that agenda item's already been dealt with. Great. Well, I think that moves us to the ethics statement. I will read it and then pause to see if anybody on the board has conflicts or the appearances of such to declare. In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it's the duty of every board member to avoid both conflicts of interest and the appearances of conflict. If any board member has any known conflict of interest or is aware of the facts that might create the appearance of such conflict with respect to any matters coming before the board today, please identify the conflict or the facts that might create the appearances of a conflict to ensure that any inappropriate participation in that matter may be avoided. And then if at any time a new matter raises a conflict during the meeting, please be sure to identify it at that time. So with that, I'll pause and see if there's any conflicts or the appearances of such that folks wish to declare.
Tom, this is Jamie. I would just like to share that I received state and federal funding to study the toxicity of PFAS, and I have served and do serve as a plaintiff's expert witness in cases involving PFAS. I also was a member of the US EPA PFAS Science Advisory Board, but that position has terminated.
Thank you.
This is Detlef, and I also receive state and federal funding to conduct research on PFAS.
Thank you. Anyone else? Great. We have that entered into the record, which is important because I think all three agenda topics relate to PFAS. The flip side of your potential conflicts of interest is expertise in exposure science and toxicology. So we're glad for your expertise, and we'll keep the disclaimers in mind as we move forward. I think we're ready to move now to the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of the meeting minutes from the previous meeting, which was April 5th. Those minutes were circulated last week. I know that we've received at least one set of suggested edits from Dr. Vandenberg, which came this morning and I haven't read. So I'm going to suggest that we, instead of moving to a vote here, first what edits John has suggested for those minutes, and then we'll pause and see if there are others. So John, would you mind sharing what you sent today? I just haven't had a chance to open it yet.
Yes, thank you. I had just a couple of small comments here. One is in terms of the participants in the meeting, just please add my name. I was omitted there.
Gotcha.
And going down on the discussion about the PFOS and PFOA bioaccumulation factor, this is where we had a lengthy discussion and voted about the questions that were posed by the state for us to consider. And I note that on item number 3, it says board members supported the use of the geometric mean as that is the value that the EPA uses in their BAF calculations. It's the April 2023 meeting. I would note that Tom Starr and I both abstained on that. And it raises the question about, it seems as though by stating in each of these instances where we take a vote, that if it just says board members support, board members agree, or some phrase like that, it implies unanimous voting in support of that. And so I would just request that we indicate that there were 2 abstentions here. I don't know that we need to have a count of those that agree, but I think if we have some that disagree or some that abstain, we should note that.
I agree. I think that's been our practice in the past as well, is to say, you know, what was being voted on first and second, you know, that it became an action item as opposed to discussion. And I think we've typically said that it passed by unanimously, or it passed, you know, X to Y. So yes, we'll add that. We'll add that 2 members abstained from voting.
Okay, thank you. And then I had one other comment. After the meeting, I think we all received a letter submitted by some interested citizens regarding the DEQ actions. And I'm sorry, I don't remember. I haven't looked at it recently, but basically the question here, the point I'd make is that we had a discussion about the need for effective and timely communication by municipalities that have been monitoring their finished water to indicate that their public water systems either are above or below the 4 part per trillion level that's been set. So I think that's kind of a missing point here. This is just like identified as a DEQ actions, but it doesn't say there was any discussion at all about those actions. And I think we did have a discussion. So I would request that that be added there too.
Can you direct me to where that is?
It's item number 9.
Item number 9. So this may have been the part of the meeting that I ducked out of because I left the last one a little bit early as well. And just help me out. You're suggesting that what we've done there is just provided a link to the presentation, but you're saying there was an element of the discussion that should be added in?
That's my view. That it doesn't sound like there was even any discussion here. There's no bullet at all underneath that. And kind of the point number 10 is the same. There's no indication that the board had any questions or discussion with in regards to the presentation. So I think the minutes would be more informative if there was at least some noting that there was a discussion with the board and the state and maybe any particular items that would be appropriate to bring forward. And again, since there was citizen letter about this point, I think it's relevant to go ahead and add that we discuss the need for effective and timely communication to customers, water system customers, about their level of exposure, which to my knowledge has not happened. I live in Durham, and Durham is one of the municipalities that was monitored, and I've received no information about it from the water system here, as an example.
And to put a finer point on it, have you already suggested what the addition there would be? The board discussed.
I did, yeah.
So just read it to us.
Okay. The bullet I would suggest is the board discussed the need for effective and timely communication by municipalities to customers of public water systems that levels above or below 4 part per trillion have been measured in finished water.
Can you drop that in the chat for us, since that's longer than just noting the 2 abstentions and then
I will do so right now.
noting the meeting attendance correction. The meeting attendance correction and the 2 abstentions are easily done, but just so that we capture it correctly, it might be good to see your suggestion in the chat and see if I can find out where the chat is on here.
I'm trying to find the chat, actually.
Maybe we don't have one.
I don't see a chat.
I have the email, and so I can just add it into the minutes.
All right. Well, then, for the purposes of voting on it as an amendment, please just read it one more time slowly so that folks will know what Franny's proposed to add, and then we'll see if there's any other suggested changes. So there's a proposed addition, item number 9, that would say,
it would say the board discussed the need for effective and timely communication by municipalities to customers of public water systems. The levels above or below 4 part per trillion have been measured in the finished water. That's a long sentence, but maybe.
No, I think it's a good one.
Okay.
Thank you. It's helpful.
Maybe we need to add PFOA and PFOS in there, 4 parts per trillion of PFOA and or PFOS.
Good point.
Great. Anyone else have any suggested edits or questions about the April minutes?
This is David. Just a point of clarification. When we say municipalities and water systems, sometimes those are two different things. There are authorities that serve as the water provider, not the municipality itself. So would it be a municipality and or provision provider of water, drinking water? I don't know if that needs to be clarified or not, but sometimes the municipality is not responsible for that.
I may have misunderstood, but I thought from the presentation it was the municipalities, but maybe the state folks can clarify that.
I guess it would just be important
Yeah, I think
to
public
reflect what
water
the discussion
systems.
actually was, as opposed,
Yeah.
these are minutes, not
True.
action items moving forward. So someone recalls what the discussion was, capture it that way.
Well, the proper language would be public water systems, because that's who needs to meet the regulations.
So if you would have it say, the board discussed the need for effective and timely communication to customers of public water systems. The levels are below 4 part per trillion of PFOA and or PFOS have been measured in finished water, something like that.
Above, right? Above 4.
I had above or below, but certainly above. Yeah.
Yes. That would be correct. Yeah, and I think any system that is above 4 should 4 parts per trillion PFOA or PFOS should notify. And that's
Again, we're not
I think
an
that
action
was
item moving forward. We're trying to capture the minutes of what was actually discussed. So,
well, I was going to say that was the spirit of the conversation.
Yeah,
gotcha. So, Franny, do you have that modification?
I do.
Great.
Okay.
That's good.
Thank you.
Since I wasn't there, I appreciate the attention to that. And then anything else? All right. Well, then it'd be appropriate to entertain a motion to accept the minutes as modified with those 3 amendments to correct the attendance, note the 2 abstentions on the vote for charge question 3 on the BAFs, and the addition of the discussion that followed the presentation at item number 9.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second, this is Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. All right. We have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the minutes as amended. And I'll just ask for yay or nays from Rich.
Yes.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yes.
Thank you, Detlef.
Yes.
Thank you, and thanks for your suggested edits. Has Gina been able to join? John?
Yes.
Thank you for your attention to the draft minutes and your suggested edits. Betsy?
Yes.
Thank you. Vining?
Yes.
Thank you. And David?
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you for your clarity that you provided on those. Great. With that, I think that we are making good progress on our agenda today, and at the section where we hear from the leadership of the two departments that impanel us. And I'll call on DEQ first. Shushma, will that be you, or do you have folks on your staff that are going to be doing that today?
I will be providing a briefing for all of us.
All right. Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary. The floor is yours.
Great. Good morning, Chair Osberger and members of the board. I wanted to focus again on PFAS, although there's other items that we will be bringing up to the board in the coming meeting. But I wanted to let the board know that today marks the first year anniversary of DEQ's release of our action strategy for PFAS. In this 1 year, we have taken a whole of department approach to address PFAS in North Carolina, where 3 primary focus areas are protecting our communities, protecting our drinking water, and cleaning up the existing contamination. And I'll highlight a few of these items so that you have a flavor of work that has been completed, but work that continues as we move forward. Related to protecting communities, we continue to work with public water systems. That was just the subject of the previous conversation, to assess the PFAS levels across the state. And we're working with those utilities to prepare for the upcoming EPA drinking water regulation. The proposal was announced in March, public comment period ended. But in preparation for that, as you know, in 2022, our department, our public water supply section, worked with the municipalities to test 50 systems over a 3-month period. And that data is now posted on our website. These systems were identified as part of those that previously had higher levels of PFOA and PFAS detected in their water systems through the PFAS network study in 2019. We basically confirmed that those same systems continue to be at levels similar to found in 2019. In addition to that, in addition to those larger systems, we are now working to sample 655 small community public water systems. And this includes schools and daycares in those community systems to create an advanced understanding of what levels of PFAS are in these systems. And going back to the previous discussion, Dr. Vanderbarg is right that there does need to be continuous communication between our department and the public water systems, as well as the affected residences. Our division has been interacting with those municipalities and the public water systems on what potential next steps could be regarding communication and additional sampling. So we're happy to receive additional feedback from the board in that implementation. This month, our Division of Waste Management under Director Scott is launching a pilot program under the Bernard Allen Emergency Drinking Water Fund. This is established by the North Carolina Legislature to support North Carolina residences that we're designing for PFAS contamination in their private drinking water wells. This pilot program will fund treatment systems that will be provided to eligible residents, and the eligibility criteria will be announced soon. That may have contamination that meets or exceeds the health advisories that EPA just proposed. And this will be based on the scale that is contingent on the household income. This program is meant to address PFAS contamination when there's no designated responsible party, and it provides alternate drinking water. It is at the scale that we can support based on the funding available, but we're looking into options for scaling up in the future. Thirdly, we're utilizing federal funding under the bipartisan infrastructure law to assist public water systems. They will need studies to be conducted, assessments to be done, and ultimately potentially designing treatment projects and getting them up and running to address PFAS contamination. And so our Division of Water Infrastructure has now introduced, and it's out for public comment, rating criteria for projects that would support PFAS funding related infrastructure projects for drinking water systems, as well as clean water systems. Our regulatory divisions are requiring PFAS information from new facilities as well as existing industries. And the type of things that they're looking into and have implemented are adding permit conditions as appropriate to address PFAS emissions or wastewater discharges. This consists often disclosing the use of PFAS, releases of PFAS, and where needed, additional monitoring. Our Division of Waste Management is requiring all solid waste sanitary landfills to include PFAS analysis of all their regular groundwater, surface water, and leachate sampling. And this letter went out in March, and I believe it requires them to begin in July of this year. Today, this board will be completing its review started in October last year of the latest scientific information on PFOA and PFAS. And you all will be recommending a method for developing bioaccumulation factors for these chemicals. We appreciate the guidance and recommendations that you'll be providing. It will help the department move forward with regulatory actions towards water quality standards that protects a variety of surface water uses. And in the information item, Chris Ventilera will highlight our next steps as well as other next steps that will be announced in the coming weeks. I wanted to also highlight a few things related to our actions at the Camorra site. As you know, the Camorra site, we are addressing through the consent order the treatment of the groundwater contamination that has existed for decades. And one of the requirements has been the construction of a barrier wall with extraction wells and a treatment system that cleans up the PFAS in the collected water. This treatment system is in operation and treating contaminated water. The barrier wall is in the process of being completed. We are beginning to review the data and the results that are coming in from the from that project. And this as a side note, I want to let you know that initially it was scheduled to be finished in May. We're working on getting that completed through Camorra's as expeditiously as possible. We have revised Camorra's work plan related to its assessment in the Lower Cape Fear. You heard a little bit about it in my reports in the past. This is beyond the immediate adjacent area of Camorra's, where in November of 2022, we asked Camorra's to start assessing in the New Hanover County, Brunswick County, Pender County, and Columbus County areas. That assessment process continues. About 5,175 wells have been tested, and 1,281 of those wells from private residences have detected PFAS above the consent order. And our team is working to ensure that they get clean drinking water in the meantime until permanent solutions can be provided per the consent order. There are a total of, out of the 5,175 that are tested, 7,700 or so homes have been identified thus far for eligible for testing. We continue to require Camorra's to do extensive outreach and increase the public participation and get their wells tested. And that is something that our department and our divisions are working heavily to get the word out to the communities. In the meantime, the private well sampling in the area adjacent to the facility continues in Bladen, Sampson County, Cumberland County, and so on. And we can provide more details later. And I'll conclude with a little bit of our PFAS work goes outside of North Carolina's boundaries and outside of DEQ's work unit. We continue to work with our EPA and other federal partners. We have a coalition of state partners that are addressing PFAS nationally. We're developing further strategies to address the life cycle of PFAS from its use all the way into waste generation and ultimate disposal. We're working closely with our Department of Health and Human Services to ensure both of our agency actions are aligned to protect public health and the environment. And then one of the other items that we launched last year was a a fellowship program. We continue to seek receive benefits of this program. It's basically a collaboration between our agency and the scientific community. 2 rounds of fellowship programs have been completed with cohorts starting each semester. And Dr. Knappe and Dr. DeWitt have been graduates of that, but really it's been a enormous advantage having experts working with DEQ, bridging the scientific understanding, research into applied science. And we have learned, our staff has learned, and I believe that they have taken away some understanding of what we go through on a daily basis. We continue to host other cohorts. Right now, Dr. Mead is working with our Division of Air Quality on items that are of interest to him, as well as the division and the department. So at the end, I just wanted to say that we are posting resources online for our residences and public to continue to stay abreast of PFAS related activities. And I can put some links on our in the chat here in a few minutes. And we look forward to giving you an update from air quality based on the questions that were asked during our last SAB meeting. And any questions I can answer, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. While the docket for this meeting was short, the one for August is starting to pile up with the Division of Air Quality's briefing on ambient air levels, and also hoping to hear from EPA's NAM group. I have a question, but I'll pause first to see if other people have questions for Assistant Secretary Masonmore. Detlef?
Yeah, thank you for the update, Sushma. I have gotten more than one question from different community members on the completion date for the retaining wall, and also there were questions about handling of any excavated soil from the site, how it was managed. Do you have any information on reasons for the delay and when the completion date will be, and also the question about the soil?
Yeah, related to the first question, we are right now, there's an 11 o'clock call. We're supposed to get an update on where the Berry Wall construction project is, I believe. And Michael Scott, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think they are within less than 500 feet of completion of the wall based on last week.
Yep.
And it's a matter of we believe if the weather holds up that the wall project will be completed in the coming weeks or so. So that's the current schedule. We're going to get an update later today. Michael, is there any other updates that you have than I do?
Good morning, everyone. Michael Scott, Division of Waste Management. Morning, Chairman Augsburger, members of the board. As Sushma said, the wall's down to a few hundred feet left for completion. Detlef, there's a soil management plan regarding soils at the site. The wall construction actually incorporates the soil that's being trenched down to 100 feet. It keeps it on site and mixed with the Portland cement as part of the slurry wall mix. So the short answer is the soils are not leaving the site. They're incorporated back into the wall construction. Any remaining soils are managed in accordance with the soil management plan on top of the wall surface. So we'll be glad to follow up with more specifics, but that's the quick answer to the question regarding soil management.
Thank you.
And Dr. Knappe, I will add that all of the extraction wells that are designed to collect that incoming groundwater before it reaches the wall are operating at full capacity. And the collected water is being treated And I believe 2 of the 3 GAC systems are running based on the flow from all the wells.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question and the response. I was curious, not for a detailed update, but maybe just like a bottom line. What's the earliest that we expect to see mammalian toxicity data coming back from the consent order studies? I know that there's ecological endpoints, but there's mammalian toxicity data on tap for each of those compounds. And the last couple of updates have said study designs are in progress, but for planning purposes, what might be the earliest that we would see the results of the study upon which we could at least consider making a reference to this?
Yeah, I'll let Franny and Michael Scott answer those questions.
Yeah, thank you for the
Try to
question.
use the
Okay.
room microphone so it doesn't echo. Does it sound better?
It doesn't echo, but it's faint.
Over here. Is this better?
I can hear you.
Okay. Right now we are waiting for Chemours to send revised protocols for the mammalian toxicity studies. That being said, we don't have any start date for these studies, and so we don't have an end date currently. I think Director Scott might be able to give a little more information, but I think that's the take home from that question.
I got you. Just thinking about planning for future meetings.
Yeah, Dr. Augsburger, I just want to relay that this is a priority for us too. We have had several review cycles on the protocol. We provided additional comments and had a technical call a few weeks ago. We're getting closer, but the work continues, and we recognize the importance and its outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not intended to put folks on the spot, but again, thinking about future meeting planning, when we have the information to make a reference dose, it seems like the machinery of the SAB can really help crank with things like, well, do benchmark dose modeling from it, evaluate data quality, folds into all the state processes like we saw for Gen X, where with available mammalian toxicity data through an NTP type design, we were able to, I think within the period of a couple of months, come up with a feedback on a provisional value and then a final. And if any of that was pending, I didn't want to load up future meetings with presentations so much that we couldn't jump into an evaluation of data quality. Are there other questions for Assistant Secretary Mason? And if not, thank you very much for the newsy update. And then I'll move on to DHHS. And I don't see Zach, so will that be you, Virginia, providing that today?
Yes, good morning, Chairman Augsburger and board. Zach is on leave, so I'll be providing the DHHS updates today. I'm Virginia Guidry, the head of the Occupational and Environmental Epidemiology branch. I'll start off with our PFAS work, and the main update from us is that we are continuing to work on potential fish consumption advisories that are based on measurements in freshwater fish in the lower Cape Fear. The fish were collected last summer, and we have the data from the fish now and are working on our advisories, basically internally reviewing potential announcement via press release, drafting signs for local health departments to use if applicable to them. And we will be reaching out to stakeholders as we get a little further along in this process here. So that work is ongoing. We are also supporting several efforts related to private well contamination near military bases in North Carolina. These efforts are led by the Navy and the Army respectively, but we are assisting on any health related questions. So we're working on several efforts there. And then we are considering updates to our testing and filtration fact sheet as new technologies for filtration are becoming available. We're basically just starting some discussions about that because those technologies are, rapidly changing, and trying to figure out a good approach to incorporate technologies when they're available, but remain very evidence-based in that. And Dr. Knappe will probably be reaching back out to you about that because you've provided assistance to us before. Just considering how we can be both inclusive and scientifically based going forward. So more to come on that. A few other topics that I'll just highlight that are high priority for us outside of PFAS. Environmental justice remains a high priority. We did submit a memo to Governor Cooper at the end of May about ongoing DHHS initiatives, and those initiatives include working with local health departments to incorporate environmental justice into their community health assessments, and enhancing our environmental health data dashboard with environmental justice metrics, continuing to promote environmental justice for health equity, and then also a funding application that we submitted to the EPA for the government to government funding mechanism, in which we would work with folks in Sampson County, and if private wells were tested and had levels of contaminants in them, we would help to provide treatment to those wells. So a funding opportunity, but those are some of our major environmental justice efforts currently. And then just a couple of other quick highlights. Our North Carolina Wastewater Monitoring Network is continuing its work to measure both COVID as well as flu and RSV in wastewater at 50 sites across the state. That program is shifting a little bit as the COVID pandemic has officially ended, although we all know COVID is still around. And so we are continuing those efforts and kind of tailoring that program further as we kind of move into the post-COVID era and figure out additional things that we can use that network to measure regarding infectious diseases in wastewater. Our climate and health team is working on several follow-up items to Executive Order 271, including a report on health effects of transportation-related pollutants and developing a notification system for climate and environmental justice funding opportunities. We do have a climate justice mini grant opportunity that will be coming out, which local health departments and community-based organizations can apply to. We're hoping for that to be released July 5th, and that will be for $30,000 a year for 2 years. And we have started surveillance for heat-related illness, as we do every summer through that surveillance program. And then lastly, just another update on environmental public health tracking. That is the program that runs the environmental health data dashboard, which I mentioned earlier regarding environmental justice metrics. We have also received some additional funds that we can apply towards hurricane recovery through that tracking program. And we are working on a project in collaboration with the Farm Worker Health Program and NC State to basically help those populations recover from hurricanes and the health effects following hurricanes. So that will conclude our updates from DHHS on key topics.
Thanks very much. When you mentioned the transportation-related pollutant effort, what's considered within the realm of transportation-related pollutants? I have an idea of it.
There are, a number of definitions for transportation-related pollutants, and much of the literature actually, focuses on transportation-related pollutants and will actually name, TRAP, transportation-related air pollutants, in their exposure assessments. So this is a summary of the health effects of those pollutants, which include particulate matter and sulfur oxides and nitrous oxides, and basically showing, just summarizing the health effects that have been documented. Of course, there's a vast literature that documents that, and the environmental justice impacts. Some communities are impacted more than others, and they're often lower income communities and communities of color. And the idea is, to help document those effects, to help underscore the need for the implementation of the North Carolina Clean Transportation Plan, which came out earlier this spring, and which we at DHHS, as well as others at DEQ and other state agencies, contributed to and is now released. So.
Thank you. Certainly transportation related, but other sources of all of those pollutants. So cumulative impacts important as well. Other questions for Dr. Guidry?
This is John Bammer. Thank you for that summary. I thought that was really helpful. You mentioned about a memo about environmental justice activities and sort of plans and proposals. I'm in Sampson County in particular. I was very interested to hear that. Do you have any details about what you're proposing there to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly share more about it. Of course, it's not funded yet, but basically, the government to government proposal through EPA, is funding for government agencies, and the requirement. One of the key requirements is to partner with a community-based organization in order to apply for the funding. And so that partnership is actually with the Environmental Justice Community Action Network, which is based in Sampson County, along with academic researchers at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and App State University. And so we'll be working together with them. They are mainly providing the testing, but we are going to be providing the treatment. And so we have identified some potential low-cost treatment systems that have both countertop and under the sink options, so that affected households could potentially choose between those. And we've selected them, again, that's all draft, but selected them for their ability to filter out a range of contaminants, because what we're expecting based on pilot data is, there will be likely bacterial contamination in some places. There may be PFAS contamination in other places. There may be other sources of contamination as well from other industrial sources. And so we wanted something that could be used for various, potential contaminants. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question, John, and the response, Dr. Guidry. Any last questions? Well, thanks. Lots of good stuff going on in both departments, and thanks you for the verbal briefings. And it's always nice to have the record that y'all provide for the meeting minutes as well, of all the actions going on for future reference or as a precursor for things that will come before the board in the future. With that, we're ready to tackle the first action item, I guess the only action item other than approval of minutes on the agenda, which is the bioaccumulation factors. Just as a reminder of where we've been, this was a charge question from DEQ last fall. At the October meeting, we had a presentation from Chris Ventiloro of North Carolina. DEQ was followed up, that talk was followed up by a supporting spreadsheet. Subsequent meetings in December, February, and April brought refinement and closure to each of the three charge questions pretty much successively. It seemed like each of those meetings we bored into a charge question and voted on it and had an answer. And where we are now is kind of the capturing the synthesis of that for the record. So a draft document was sent last Friday, and I realize there's a balance to be struck between the level of detail. The document, I think, does a good job of referencing when the meetings were and providing links to those meetings at the bottom for the granularity of our recommendations. And then also a balance to be struck between the level of detail. The wording is important, though, in whatever we convey. When we did the synthesis of PFMOAA recommendations, we went through about 4 iterations of wordsmithing before we got it done. I don't know that that's wordsmithing is real productive, but I do think words matter. And this is the first time that the board has had a chance to see the synthesis. So I'm going to suggest that we take this in a couple of steps. I do think it's important to make sure folks are comfortable with the wording as is, or what suggestions you would have on that level of detail issue to make sure that we conveyed not just what was done, but some of the basis behind it. And if we feel good about it, we can vote to finalize it, because this is only round one of seeing it. If we feel like it needs some additional round of editing, we can go that path as well. So with that introduction, I'll just remind people that the goal here is to respond to DEQ's charge question on the source of a bioaccumulation factor for PFOA and PFOS, bioaccumulation of water to fish by all routes, fish exposure to water through food, through the water column, so that they can use that in establishing a water concentration that's protective of people's ability to catch and consume fish. This isn't a fish protective value. That's kind of in EPA's documents. This is a human health consuming a fish protective value that would follow other aspects of DEQ's rulemaking. And remember that DEQ's rulemaking already specifies things like the weight of an individual and the fish consumption rate of an individual. It did not specify the BAF to use, and that's what they've asked us for. So with that background, I'll pause and say, does anybody have a question on scope? And I'd like to hear in particular from Chris Ventiloro on whether or not that scope is in fact what you're a good synthesis, or whether you have anything to add before we get started.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Augsburger. No, I think the synthesis was great. I don't have anything to add at this time, but thanks so much for all of the work.
Yeah, so DEQ's water quality rules have a section where they can consider bioaccumulation by fish as an endpoint to set a protective water column concentration. And weight of an individual, fish consumption rate are specified by rule, but BAF wasn't. So we're looking at a source of BAFs. Anybody else have any question on where we've been before we tackle editing of the document? All right, well, since this is the first time that people have had a chance to see it, I'll open the floor for any questions or comments on the draft as circulated. When I mentioned that bit about the balance between level of detail and simply referencing the recordings for level of detail, I'd be interested in hearing what the board thinks about some light edits for things like under the board's response to item 1, where it said the board reviewed the quality and data by EPA. I thought it might be helpful to point out some of the things that we highlighted, not just that we thought it was appropriate and scientifically sound, but why. When I go back and listen to those recordings, some things that we emphasized about charge question number 1 was that EPA's literature review was thorough and resulted in them gathering 8,200 references, and that it was current, that their literature review, upon which the state is asking us, is EPA's data adequate, was current through mid-2020. So it's robust and current. And then similarly about data quality, that EPA's data quality use assigned data quality based on the number of samples, the spatial and temporal association of the samples, and that they only use data considered to be of medium and high quality. So all of that can be implied in the statement that the board thought that EPA's approach was appropriate, or it could say that the board thought EPA's approach which yielded 8,200 references that were current as of mid-2020, that went through a data quality sieve of these 4 steps and then culled the data that were considered to be of anything other than medium or high quality doesn't seem to me to be a major addition, but it's also in the recordings if somebody wanted to go find it. That's the type of thing that I guess I was trying to get at with in terms of a balance of level of detail versus just saying it was acceptable. So any perspectives on that or other directions that folks want to take it if you have your own edits to suggest, or whether you're good with it as is?
Tom, this is John Van Riv. A couple comments.
John, I can barely hear you. You might need to speak up just a little bit.
Okay. Is that a little better? Can you hear me now?
It is, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate a fairly concise summary like this. It really is very effective in my mind because the recipients of this are DHHS and DEQ, right? They are the recipients, and they've been involved in the discussions from the get-go. So it seems to me, by having the links here, the recordings as well as the references that you've attached here and highlights, that it really is a pretty complete picture. I think there is something to be said for being focused and concise, which this is, and I think you've done a really nice job with that. So I'm supportive of this, but I certainly can appreciate that it could be substantially longer if that was felt to be helpful to the DHHS and DEQ. So my other point is that I went back and looked at the recording of our last discussion from April, and we had discussed question number 3 and actually had edited that question to change the wording, which we finally ended up voting on, both the changing of the question being posed that was then carried forward. So it was edited on the spot by the group. And what it was the last sentence of it, well, the question was, through discussion, I'm looking at the last paragraph here where it says to address the 3rd question under the board's response heading. If you go to the last sentence of that, it says, through discussion, the board determined that the EPA's method of using the geometric mean for BAF calculation is appropriate and scientifically sound to represent NC's water bodies. The change that occurred during the meeting was to replace the words "and scientifically sound" with the words "is appropriate." And so I think this actually doesn't capture what was in the recording that was made that day. So I would suggest, to be consistent with what we actually voted on, it would read, the mean for BAF calculation is appropriate to represent North Carolina's water bodies. That was the final thing we voted on.
Thank you.
That's my only comment. Thank
That
you.
was my mistake.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I just said that was my mistake.
Yeah, between the second to the last meeting and our April meeting, so between February and April, we suggested that charge question 3 could be refined to say, is the geometric mean a scientifically acceptable approach, instead of which value would you pick? And I do think the discussion that flowed from that then was, yes, this geometric mean is is an appropriate approach, as opposed to it's the only appropriate approach. Any other suggested edits? Or perspectives on level of detail? I had just another question then. Folks are just getting a chance to look at it, please do. I'll pause for a little bit longer. In the end of the first sentence under the board's response, where it says data presented in EPA's draft aquatic life criteria for PFOA and PFOS, as well as the ranks of that data presented to the board received. I don't know exactly what's intended to be said there, but I'm having trouble understanding it. So maybe following the comma, as well as the ranks that the data presented to the board received. Is it the quality rankings of high, medium, and low? So it's probably a Franny or a Chris question since y'all did the draft. There's a couple of components to, that are important in question number one. The currency of the data was part of it. The fact that there were data quality sieves, and then the fact that EPA only used the medium and high quality data. I was just wondering what was intended to be conveyed after the comma, because it's not totally clear to me, and we might be able to make it clearer if it's not clear to anybody else, in case it's unclear to anyone else.
What the sentence was intended to say is just that the board reviewed the quality ranking systems and then also the specific ranks that the data we included was ranked as. So only the medium and high quality data. But
Would
that
it be
is
acceptable then, since the first part of the sentence mentions the quality ranking system is in the previous part, to replace after PFOS and PFOA a comma? Since we've already said that there was a ranking system, just proceed with and use of only medium and high quality data from that ranking system. So that's a question for Chris and Franny as well. I feel like the sentence says, we talked about the data, the quality, and then after that comma, instead of as well as the ranks that the data presented to the board received. It's not just what the ranks were. I think the operative part is that the low quality data were omitted so that only BAFs of high and medium quality were used. The ranks are interesting, but the fact that the ranks were acted upon, I think, is the key there.
I can make that edit.
I think that makes sense. Also, apologize. It was taking a second for me to get that document open, but
That's okay.
yeah, looking at it, yeah, I think that's a good clarification of what the intent of the statements was, and it's helpful.
So anyone else?
Maybe a question. I think maybe my memory is faulty, but at one point I thought besides the EPA database, we also looked at some data based on fish collected in the Cape Fear River. I was just curious whether the BAF values derived from the geometric mean are reasonable for that data set.
The second paragraph of the board's response in the draft says that we both did that comparison we requested that comparison from the staff. They
Mhm.
presented it, and that we found them to be similar.
I was just going back to the October and April presentations, and maybe I looked too fast, but I couldn't find it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's intended to be conveyed there. If you look at the second paragraph under the board's response, was that we asked the state to do a couple of things. Between meeting 1 and 2, we asked for a look at the entire EPA data set, not culled just for the species that occurred in North Carolina. And we did not yet have the results from the Cape Fear River. And then between meetings 2 and 3, when during meeting 2 we saw some of those results, we encouraged to look at whether or not the North Carolina specific values that were only for one drainage, when this number is intended to be applied across the state. And the summary statement here is intended to convey that we thought they were generally similar enough to respond to the question that EPA's data was appropriate characterization. But if anybody else thinks that needs additional clarity or saw it a different way, now would be the time to mention it.
The statement is clear. I just am having trouble recollecting the values and finding them in the attached documents.
The data from the Cape Fear study was presented in a different slideshow, but I can link that in the revision.
I think it would be good to include that, yes. Maybe that was from February.
Any further questions or comments?
I'm good.
Well, didn't make very many edits on it. Some suggested changes. How are folks feeling? You feel like you are equipped to have a vote on this with the light edits that have been suggested, or would you like to see it a second time? You can just come on and say, I'm ready, or bring it back, a clean version.
I'm ready for a vote. I don't think I need to see it.
Jamie's ready. Others?
This is Rich. I'm ready.
I'm ready. Detlef.
I'm ready.
All right. It sounds like an emerging consensus. Anybody feel like they need more time with it? Morning, Gina. Good to see you.
Good morning.
If you're just joining us, we're at this section of the meeting. How long have you been here? I guess I should say before I give you a recap.
I will say just a few minutes, maybe less than 5.
So we're just about to vote on some light edits that were made to the BAF summary, and but I'm going to pause and see if you had any suggested edits to the summary, because we have time to consider them if you read it and have anything to suggest to make it better or clearer before we would take a vote on it.
No, no additional suggestions.
Okay. One last one for me. It's in the recordings, so it's probably not important. But when we say EPA's method of a geometric mean, EPA took a geometric mean when they had more than one set of data for the same species. So they took a geometric mean of all the largemouth bass data. Then they took a geometric mean of all the sunfish data. But they did not use a geometric mean to come up with a final value. They used a centile value. It's in the recordings, but to somebody who reads this, it may be worth a parenthetical in that regard, just so that they're clear that we were clear. But again, that's back to my initial point on granularity. The document would get quite long if we pointed out every bit of what was in the discussions, which are referenced. I guess it would be appropriate to entertain a motion to approve it with the edits that were suggested today.
So moved.
I'll second.
Great. Well, as is our practice in the virtual world, I got to call up my roster here and take a roll call vote on approval of the BAF summary as lightly edited today. And then Rich?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Detlef?
Yes.
Gina?
Yes.
Thank you. John?
Yes.
Betsy?
Yes.
Viney? Viney, if you're still on, we didn't hear. And David?
Yes.
Thank you, Viney. I heard you at that time. And David? Well, we have well more than a quorum, even with the 3 folks that weren't able to join us today. So that bit of business is done. Thanks for your attention to that. Working through the charge questions to refine them and to respond to them over a series of 3 meetings with data shared in between seemed to work pretty well. And we've got all of the granularity of those discussions captured in the recordings. I'll work with Franny to make those couple of changes, and then we'll be done. We are at the, I think, the penultimate section of the meeting, which may in fact be the ultimate, unless we've had anybody request to speak at the public comment section. We are fine with the schedule. Would anybody want to take a break before we have the DEQ presentation that would close us out, or would you prefer to power through that and keep going?
Power on.
Power on the general consensus. Thumbs up, thumbs down. All right, looks like the ayes have it. And I think we're at the portion of the agenda for an informational item, not an action item. And see if it's just a second while I scroll down through my agenda. This is a presentation from DEQ, but I'm uncertain as to who's going to be giving that, so I'll just pause for a second.
Oh, hi, Tom. This is Chris. I'll be doing the presentation today. And just so everyone knows,
yeah, I think actually Assistant Secretary Mace-Moore alluded to that now that I think about it. Chris Ventiloro, for all of you, again, starting back in October, get State Water Quality Standards Coordinator. So thank you, Chris.
All right. Thank you, Chair Augsburger, and good morning again to all the members of the board. This will probably be a relief, but this will be a fairly short presentation, so you get to a break quickly enough. basically so I really wanted to start off by personally thanking everyone for all of your time and expertise and the work that you've done to address the questions that we posed regarding the use of EPA's bioaccumulation factors. I think that final supporting document, once it's finished and done, will actually be really helpful for us, not only for the department itself in having a record of this process, but also this is something that will ultimately be shared with the Environmental Management Commission and the general public as well, just to provide general information, especially for the EMC when they're determining, making their decisions for the adoption of surface water standards. So thank you again, everybody. And with that said, this presentation is really to just kind of do a quick, kind of come back full circle and just do like a quick recap of, to restate how the work that the board has done will really play into the development of surface water standards in the future. Now, I'll just say up front, I don't have any specifics on the development of the PFAS standards at this point. I think those details are still being worked out as to when exactly that will start and what form that will take. But for now, it's just kind of more of a recap of how the work that you all have done and how that will play into that process. So I'm going to stop my video and share my presentation. So hopefully you all can see this. Go into.
Yeah, it looks good. It's in presentation mode now.
Okay. Okay, great. So as I mentioned, this is just going to be a quick recap. You've seen most of this information before. Just as a quick reminder, though, that we have these surface water standards, and they're designed to protect for a number of different what are called designated uses in surface waters. The main uses that we're talking about in the context of the bioaccumulation factors are the fish tissue consumption and water supply uses. Now, generally, when we establish standards, we'll establish them based on published EPA criteria documents or other published EPA guidance. But for substances such as PFAS that do not have current recommendations, or there's not a lot of information supporting the development of standards, we'll turn to our narrative standards for toxic substances, which is described in the North Carolina Administrative Code in 15A NCAC 02B 0208. And just a quick review of the bioaccumulation factors. We've talked about this a lot, but they are used to estimate the accumulation of the substance in the fish tissues from the exposure of that organism in their aqueous environment, as well as through the food that they ingest. And they're simply determined by comparing the fish tissue concentrations to the water column concentrations, ideally from samples that are taken at the same time at the same location. And the significance of these BAFs when considering standards development is that they really allow us to determine water column concentrations that, if met, will prevent the accumulation of that substance in the fish tissue to a level that is potentially harmful to people when they consume that fish tissue. The way these fish tissue and water supply standards are calculated, again, they're described in that narrative standard for toxic substances in the 02B 0208 narrative standard rule. And that rule provides the calculations that are shown on this slide. And I won't go too much into the detail of these calculations because Chair Augsburger kind of touched on a lot of this already this morning. And I think you've seen this probably enough times that you're familiar with it. But we have those constants defined in rule that are shown below. And the critical component is the BAF. So the calculations can be used in a few different ways in the context of developing standards. They can be used to calculate narrative standard values. This is generally done for substances that do not currently have numeric standards adopted into rule. And PFAS and other emerging contaminants are or compounds are a really good example for when this approach is helpful, since these substances that are generally, in a broad sense, they're kind of unregulated. So they wouldn't be expected to have existing standards of rule. So without those existing standards, we can turn to this narrative standard, calculate these narrative standard values, which can then be used. They provide a regulatory value, which can then be used to estimate, to establish permit limits, where otherwise we wouldn't have a control in place to do that. The second use of the narrative standard is basically to use these calculations to develop numeric standards that would actually be taken through the rulemaking process to be established as statewide standards in rule. And this next slide basically kind of gives you an idea of how that will occur or can occur. This slide is really a simplification of that rulemaking process. It generally takes about 3 years to complete this process, so it's kind of a long time span when substance is identified as needing some kind of regulatory value. The narrative standard kind of provides that opportunity to say, okay, we need a control in place. We can use a narrative standard, and then we can also, in time, establish numeric standards through this rulemaking process. You can see that there's 3 stages: development stage, a state approval stage, and a federal approval stage. The development stage is kind of where we're at now, in a sense, with development of PFAS and other standards, in that we review existing guidance, we'll seek information or input from the Science Advisory Board. Ultimately, you would come to some final value to be recommended to the Environmental Management Commission. And then it would kind of move on to the state approval stage, where the EMC would deliberate and decide on approval of a proposed standard. And that's important because that stage includes a public comment period. And that public comment period has to meet the requirements of the North Carolina Administrative Procedures Act, as well as the requirements set forth in the Clean Water Act. And then there's a few other steps that the state approvals process goes through, which is after EMC approval, we would go through Rules Review Commission approval and ultimately get signed off by the Attorney General's office. And then as a very last stage in that federal approval category, since surface water standards fall under the purview of the Clean Water Act, the EPA does a final Clean Water Act review of any adopted standards that a state has. And they basically do that to determine whether the standards meet the intent of the Clean Water Act. And they also consider Endangered Species Act protections in consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA, and then ultimately inform North Carolina of any approval or disapproval. And another aspect of this is that with each time standards are provided or recommended for adoption, there's also a fiscal analysis component that's required by the North Carolina Administrative Procedures Act. So really, that is kind of all that I have for today. It's just a real quick recap of how the work that the SSAB has done to help inform the development and use of these BAFs, how they'll be taken and potentially kind of used in the various ways to come up with regulatory values and the rulemaking process that would occur to adopt those values into rule. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. And thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Chris. Questions for Chris on the water quality standards rulemaking process, where we are in it or the path ahead? I think it's interesting that our charge way back in 2017 talks about advising on a range of risks. And we discussed that a little bit in terms of the BAF, that we could have provided a range of values that would provide a range of risk, but the rest of the attributes of that equation are already fixed in rule, which means you can't really provide a range of risks for body weight or water consumption rate or fish consumption rate, because that's already fixed. I guess it's just an observation, but it's interesting there that I wonder if there's a path at some point in that rulemaking process to talk about whether or not, instead of one value statewide with all of those input parameters, there could be a value that's crafted for water bodies that are, maybe more important for subsistence use for people or something like that, where you might take the upper percentiles of some of those values or lower percentiles, depending on how they affect the endpoint, to provide a value that could be either more protective or more reflective of some individual exposures, rather than taking average for one statewide number.
Yeah, there definitely is an option in the rules to establish more site-specific standards, where it's identified that there may be a greater risk, especially to subsistence fishers. That's definitely a mechanism that is in place in the rule.
Yeah, it's interesting. Other questions for the State Water Quality Standards Coordinator while we have his expertise on the line? Okay. Well, thank you, Chris.
So much, everybody.
I think we're at the last section of our abbreviated agenda today, which was the opportunity for public comments. But I believe it's the practice that folks had to have signed up for that in advance so that they could have been granted panelist access. I'll have to look to Franny or Stephen, our host, to find out whether we have anybody who had requested to speak.
There hasn't been anyone that has requested to speak or arrived in the room.
All right. Well, again, I appreciate everybody's participation, staff for preparing materials for distribution, Stephen for getting us together virtually, and y'all's flexibility for being willing to do it on a remote basis for an abbreviated agenda. I alluded earlier that it appears that the August meeting agenda will be more full if we're able to secure the EPA NAM presentation, and we expect to get the presentation from Division of Air Quality on ambient air levels and potentially priority pollutant issues to revisit there, if any. We had said when we moved the meetings from Mondays to Wednesdays that we'd evaluate that on kind of a semester basis to make sure that our academicians that have teaching requirements that they can't get out of, that we pick a date that works for them. I don't know if that becomes an issue in August or not, but feel free to send me an email if it does, and we can repoll the group for what our summer to fall schedule will be. But that was the intent of moving it previously, was it seemed like we were kind of always excluding a couple of people who had teaching obligations on Monday. If you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I had changed my teaching schedule to Wednesday, Friday to make Monday available for the fall. So if we stick with Wednesday, I would have a conflict for the fall semester.
We may have to repoll that then, because the original polling was because we were, at least last semester,
right,
potentially missing people for Mondays. But that's how the August meeting is shaping up. Again, thanks everybody for your participation. With that, I think we have, but I could entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right.
Aye.
Thanks again so much for your participation, and look for follow-up notes and potentially a poll about when we'll gather in this late summer and fall. Take care, folks.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody.
Aye.